Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we continue our miniseries, Sony's Spider-Man, One More Movie, as we see if, like in the story, is it worth Sony trading their soul to the devil themselves, i.e. Marvel, in order to make one last good Spider-Man film.
Welcome to Medium Shift. I am Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And this episode, we are indeed continuing our continually untitled series of theatrically released Spider-Man films. Finally getting into the Spider-Man of the modern... I can't really say modern era, but like the latest iteration of Spider-Man on screen. With Spider-Man Homecoming. There's a lot of things certainly to say about this film, especially the production around it. Like, obviously, this is a very interesting turning point with the way that Spider-Man was approached by Sony and so on and so forth, especially after the failure of Amazing Spider-Man 2. So I am very much looking forward to talking about it. So, Ev, what did you think of Spider-Man Homecoming?
I think it was a really good idea that Sony have finally gone full British with their Spider-Man. Like, they started American, then they went to a half American, half Brit. Now they've gone full Brit, and it's worked out really well for them.
They should have just started with Brits in the beginning.
Yep, clearly.
Yep.
Because although I don't know how young Tom Holland will have been at that point, or whether that would have worked in 2002.
He could have done it, right? He might have. He strikes me as the kind of kid who was doing flips at like 6 years old. So, yeah.
It just feels like Spider Babies, the TV show.
Yep, true.
Yes, but no. I do think this is the best of the Spider-Men. Not necessarily the best movie, but certainly the best Spider-Man out of everyone. Yeah, Tom Holland did a great job. And who would have thought bringing in Marvel's help to make a Marvel film would have turned out so well? Shocking. It's almost like they understand the character.
Yeah, wild that. It's almost like Spider-Man is like Marvel's Mickey Mouse, and they actually knew how to approach the character, rather than making an Aunt May spin-off. It's just, anyway.
Look, I'd be okay if they spun off this Aunt May.
Yeah, I feel like it would just be 2 hours of laughing about how attractive she is, which I don't know if I'm really here for, honestly, but yeah.
But it's more Marissa Tomei, so I'm happy.
Yeah, no fair. Yeah.
But yes, I think basically the first two scenes, the scene with the Vulture straight after the battle, and with Peter's, and the second scene with Peter's homemade movie, I think are perfect representations of why Marvel knows what they're doing, because they know how to make, especially lately, how to make a sympathetic villain and a really human villain.
Yeah, which they didn't always do. Like, I mean, Marvel generally has a bad track record with villains, but that is something that has slowly shifted over time. So
yes, they certainly have gotten better at it.
Yeah.
I think basically the turning point was about halfway through Phase 2, I think.
Yeah, just about. We still, was that around the time of... I mean, we still got like films like Ant-Man and Doctor Strange after that and things like that. So I would say, if anything, like mid to early Phase 3, because you've got the really great ones like Black Panther, I think is excellent. Yeah. Obviously Thanos 2, so on and so forth. So yeah.
I was just saying that's when the shift started happening, because you see they actually put in, like, even with Ultron, if it was a bit of a dip in terms of villain, but at least then you could see they were trying to make him interesting and a bit more complex and not just a reskin of the superhero.
Yeah, exactly. Which, granted, they still kept doing afterwards, if you want to talk about Black Panther, but, I mean, much more interesting villain one way or another. But yeah, absolutely. The Vulture fits into an interesting lineage. But
and fits in perfectly in the universe that they created.
Yeah, totally.
And then, in one scene, Marvel basically sums up everything Sony couldn't do with Spider-Man. And just went, yep, this is who he is as a character. He is a young, fun, awkward teenager who is good at doing flips and tricks, but also is just a nerd. Just straight nerd.
Yep. Really socially awkward, kind of unhelpful guy sometimes. Which I think is good. I think this is, if the Amazing Spider-Man films really did not get Peter Parker, but got Spider-Man, and then the original Spider-Man movies like got Peter Parker, but never quite got the tone of Spider-Man down specifically. Like Tom Holland's, I feel like presents like a perfect combination of those two. You really feel not quite the duality at the very least, but he has the level of joy and fun and confidence that Spider-Man has, in combination with the nerdy, awkward teenage angst that is supposed to be Peter Parker. So
yes. It certainly helps that they've gone for a more accurate representation of modern nerd culture.
Yep.
I guess, in which it is both a bit more accepted and clearly not just about being awkward, super smart people. It's also about the pop culture, the still having friends that just also are as nerdy as you, and making Lego Death Stars.
I was about to say that line, come around to my house and make the Lego Death Star. It's like, it feels culturally appropriate, I think, a lot of that stuff, which I think is fun. And it helps that Disney owns Marvel. Disney owns Marvel. Yes, Disney owns Marvel and Star Wars, so... Yep. So not only is it like contemporary popular culture, it's all the Disney popular culture. Even better, except with Sony smartphones as well, so... Because this ultimately is still a Sony film, technically, even if, like, the reins of creativity is, like, you can tell is very, very much in Marvel Studios, so...
Well, wasn't the urban legend that Kevin Feige offered his help for free on The Amazing Spider-Man just because he wanted to see it done well?
Yep, and then they didn't listen to anything.
They turned it down. No. And then they came crawling back to him, and suddenly he had the power.
Yeah, exactly. Reportedly, like, I assume a lot of this is just, like, marketing speak, but Feige's always been a massive Spider-Man fan, and there was reports that he gave Sony a really detailed list of notes of how to change a lot of the things in Amazing Spider-Man 2, which they didn't listen to, obviously. But it did put him in a very, very delightful position when that movie did not do very well, and Sony finally decided to strike a deal with Marvel, so... which, like, I feel like ended up being in their best interest, because they actually had a successful Spider-Man franchise, while also integrating it into the MCU, which is, as we're kind of aware, is, like, the pop culture juggernaut of the 2010s, so, yeah.
And it meant they had enough hype, I guess, to actually go ahead with their little spin-off stories that we'll talk about next episode.
We'll get to Venom. I mean, the spin-offs are still kind of happening, but anyway, Sony's still gonna Sony, right? Like, I mean, as much as I think this movie is a success, both critically and commercially, like, there's still a lot of impulses that they still struggle with, especially in Venom. Regarding this.
But that is a future.
Sorry, what were we gonna say?
I was just saying, but that's for a future episode.
Yeah, we'll get there next time. I will say quickly as well, but I also really enjoyed this film. I think it definitely isn't like Spider-Man 2 levels, I think, esque, in that it is hamstrung in certain ways, but also liberated in others. And generally, at the end of the day, I think is like a fun Spider-Man movie, but like a specific kind of niche version of a Spider-Man movie, in that it has some really good elements, but is missing some key elements because of the previous films. The screenwriters of this film specifically said they made a laundry list of things that were covered in the previous films that they all wanted to avoid, including some of the more dark and tragic elements of being Spider-Man, like specifically the drama and weight of the tragedy that leads to the origins of Spider-Man, as well as like certain like villains and characters and so on and so forth. Like, they really just did not want to tread on any of the ground of the previous films, which like makes sense from a consumer's perspective. If you're going to reboot Spider-Man for the third time in my lifetime, you should like do something different with it. But in doing so, I feel leaves a lot of the more interesting and more pivotal, like I guess you could say cardinal, like aspects of Spider-Man on the table, because they've already been covered better in like the original Spider-Man trilogy. So I feel like you have some of the great stuff, like the high school, like light, joyous, like very Ferris Bueller type fun coming of age story, while lacking some of the narrative weight and heft. And tragedy, as we've noted before, like Spider-Man is kind of inherently a comedic character, or pretending to be a comedic character, but actually very a tragic figure. But none of that is really in here. Like they barely reference Uncle Ben, and like his biggest tragedy is that his billionaire daddy is just like mad at him for a little bit, and that's kind of it. So I know that's selling it short of a little bit, but like it doesn't quite have the dramatic heft I feel of the earlier films, which is a shame. But I still think the movie itself is quite fun. So
he is not the most tragic character in his own film.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Honestly, all that tragedy just seemed to be moved to the Vulture.
Yeah. We're gonna have to talk about the Vulture quite a bit. Both as a character who I think is really interesting, but also ideologically as well. In that Vulture's, we've talked about our political slants in this podcast before, but Vulture is right. He gets screwed over by a billionaire at the very beginning, and then managed to just like basically just make a living for himself specifically. And like, sure, he's selling weapons at the very least, but he's like the superhero with the billionaire friend who's giving him all this fancy tech and suits and things like that is like not a great guy. And I know that makes for a sympathetic villain, but it also puts it in like a weird position in that like, I feel like if anything, the original Spider-Man, especially like the poverty-stricken Spider-Man that he's often depicted as, has more in common with the Vulture than he does Tony Stark, which is like one of the weird problems with integrating Spider-Man into the MCU via Tony Stark, is that connecting him to that character makes for some weird, and personally for me, kind of uncomfortable contrasts and parallels. So I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, definitely early on, I was super sympathetic to the Vulture. I'm like, yeah, no, you screw those guys. Honestly, I was kind of hoping that a Damage Control would become the bad guys somehow.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Government contracts with weapons dealers. Jesus Christ, they're not a good thing.
No. Like he said, the billionaire is being paid to clean up the mess that he was part of. And honestly, I totally agree. When he tried to murder a child, that kind of made it more believable that, we should probably stop him. But then by the end, especially with the mid-credit scene, where he basically just like, I don't know that guy.
Yep.
I'm just like, okay, cool. They've turned him back into some sort of anti-hero now.
Yeah, pretty much.
He has a code that I very much agree with.
Like, there is that one specific scene that I guarantee they just threw in there to make him feel villainous enough when he disintegrates Logan Marshall Green, like the first Shocker. When like, I thought that, and then they turn it into a comedic beat. Like, I thought this was the anti-grav gun. It's like, no, that's the one over there. And I hated that scene first time I saw it, because I'm like, don't pull your frickin' punches. Like, it's such a... It doesn't feel like something the character would necessarily, like, I don't know, it felt like such a kick the dog, like, narrative moment. You know that, like, scene specifically in so many movies to show a villain being incredibly villainous by doing something, like, really evil and petty like that. It felt like that, and I just don't... I was not a fan of that at all. I think the film works better. Yeah. I think the film would work better in a lot of ways if they kind of reframed the Vulture, but yeah, I don't know. That just felt really off to me.
Weirdly, my issue with that is because they undercut it with that joke, it loses all actual menace that could have possibly come out with that kick the dog moment. Because in an ideal world, that's the reminder that, he's still running a criminal enterprise. And yes, that guy was a bit of a dick, but he had to do what he was doing. And it's shown that he's ruthless. But the fact that he then goes, I thought it was the anti-grav gun. It's like, so you weren't meaning to kill him?
Yeah, but he still, like glosses over the fact that he's just disintegrated a person in front of them. Like, I don't know. That didn't work for me.
Yeah, it felt like they were trying to have their cake and eat it too in that scene. It's like, yes, look, he's a menace. He's evil. He doesn't care about killing. But also, like, he's still just a run-off guy. Never meant to kill people. Who was just trying to it was a simple mistake. I'm like, don't have him be jerky and say he's not trying to kill, and then still also be callous enough to just go, I guess you're the new Shocker now, dust off the remnants of his dead colleague and throw it at someone else. Yep.
Just maybe toe that line a little bit better. I think would have been nice. But anyway, we're getting distracted. Like, I still think that the villain itself was, like, interesting in a lot of ways and so on and so forth, but it did make for some weird stuff sometimes. So,
what did you think of his design?
Oh, yeah, no, I loved it. Yeah, I think it's really spot on. Like, we'll talk about the sources obviously in a little bit, because that is the point of the podcast. But this version of the Vulture is like almost entirely original. Like there's almost nothing to do with him in the comics. The version in the comics, like the name is the same, obviously Adrian Toomes, but in the comics he's a specific scientist who creates an anti-grav harness and just decides to do crime. Like like how he often does. He is like specifically geriatric in the comics. Like he's always portrayed as an older man, which is something they kind of shy away from in this, and that he feels more like a middle-aged family man specifically. If anything, he has more in common with the Ultimate version, which is Blackie Drago. Specifically since the Ultimate comics as well, he got his suit from the Tinkerer, which is the same thing that happens in this film as well. So the character itself is generally original, but the costume design I think is excellent. Like I think it's a really, really good modern adaptation of what in the original comics is a very dopey 60s suit of basically a really old guy in like a green leotard with some fake wings. So yeah.
Honestly, my thought was, I'm so very good. They've made him into like a menacing figure. They've tied it into the world so well as well. And linked it to the Ultimate with the Tinkerer kind of thing, which was desperately needed because, yes, like you said, very 60s. I'm pretty sure I've seen a more threatening costume than the comic book one in the Scooby-Doo movies, who had also a character who had wings and flies.
Yeah, it is a very Scooby-Doo costume, actually, the original one. A lot of those costumes are... But no, I think it's good. And he looks menacing as well. Like, especially every time the score kicks in and the first time he gets picked up and you see, like, the red eyes and everything like that.
Green.
Like, it's...
Green
eyes. Oh, green eyes, yeah, sorry. Like, it's just... The tone of the costume, I think, is quite good. Honestly, there's been a lot of really good Vulture redesigns in the last few years. Like, there's this one... the version of Ultimate Spectacular Spider-Man is fine. The one in the PS4 Spider-Man game is quite good. It gives him, like, a mask that makes it look like a beak as well, which I think is quite cool. There is a costume... that he has in Spider-Man Web of Shadows, which is a Spider-Man game that I've referenced before, where he has an anti-grav harness, but his wings are basically made out of a combination of swords, essentially, like a bunch of daggers that they kind of connect up and he uses around, and is actually really, really interesting visually, which I love. I would love to see that adapted to screen sometimes, because I think that's the most imposing version of the Vulture. But yeah, no, I think this costume totally works as well, so...
Yeah, like I said, it's really done very well with the Vulture, and I also really like, speaking of the Vulture, the Act 2 twist of, hey look, it's the Vulture. Oh, he's the father of Peter's girlfriend. Yep,
yeah. Which, I've said it before, but like most Spider-Man villains work best when they have some sort of personal connection to Peter Parker. And that was a great, great way to introduce that. I've seen people complain that that's kind of contrived and such as well, but, like, honestly, I don't care. I think the narrative moment is strong enough that, like, regardless of all coincidences, I think that is, like, genuinely, like, probably one of the best scenes in the movie when he first, like, sees him at the door and he's freaking out. And then in the car, when he's slowly piecing things together while waiting at a traffic light, is just excellent. So, yeah, all that stuff is really good.
Yes, I'm so thankful for that whole, like, how they basically clock each other very quickly. Even if it was pieced together, it wasn't drawn out of, like, it's the bad guy and the superhero, but they don't know that they're with each other kind of thing. Like, I really liked it, that it was just like, yep, okay, yes, you saved my life, I owe you one, so I'm not going to kill you now. You look after my girlfriend because she seems to like you. You look after my daughter because she seems to like you. And, back away. I just really love that whole scene of just, like, it was so menacing, but so good to bring in that connection so quickly as well. From twist to clocking each other in their personal lives, perfect amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really good, and the movie, the whole third act kind of turns on a dime, I think, at that scene, which is great. Even if I think the rest of the third act is actually quite bad, I'll say. Like, the whole sequence, him flying in the plane, with the plane going camouflage, and it's very dark, like, it's just visually very, very messy. So while I like the emotional stakes of what's going on in that scene, like, action-wise, I can never tell what is specifically going on, which doesn't help, so... But anyway, I'm just going through some of my notes at the very least. I guess we can talk a little bit more about the production and the development of this film in many ways, and obviously there is a lot of factors that kind of led to its creation. a lot of it we've talked about before. The first leak of this possibly happening was in the Sony email hacks, which revealed that they were in brief conversation with Marvel for Spider-Man to reprise his role, to be introduced into the MCU, but that initially kind of fell through until, I think it was February 2015, they officially announced the Spider-Man MCU deal, and then he was added into Captain America Civil War, which happened super last minute as well. Like, that involved quite a bit of reshoots and new CGI and so on and so forth to put him in there. There was a number of different actors, young actors at the time, who were considered, like Logan Lerman and Dylan O'Brien, while Tom Holland obviously obviously I think Tom Holland is great. I would have been interested to see Dylan O'Brien as well. I feel like he skews a little bit older, so that would have been kind of nice, but I think there's very little to complain about regarding the casting. As I've kind of noted before, like, the fact that this movie exists as the 6th theatrically released Spider-Man film, while only being the first in this series of Spider-Man films, puts it in a weird and tricky position that does, like, kind of limit its breathing room in some ways, even if I think it generally works for the most part. This is technically still officially a Sony movie as well. Like, I think Sony funded the film completely, as far as I'm aware, and got a good chunk of most of the box office revenues. They handled the marketing and all that as well, and so on and so forth. Even if in many ways, like, it feels like an MCU film through and through. Obviously, all the references to the universes and tying it in, and just the tone of it as well. Like, I think, if anything, this is one of the funniest MCU movies as well. I was watching it the whole way through, and I'm just going through my notes now, and I'm saying again, good joke. This film is legit funny and snapping throughout. Like, I think the fact that it skews so much away from the tragedy and drama almost turns it into a straight comedy at times. Yeah. Which, look, I think a lot of that is really, really entertaining. Like, there's a lot of really, really funny stuff in here.
I think you were quite apt before when you compared it to like a John Hughes film.
Yeah.
Like, all the little drama comes from, like, just the actual, like, high school stakes of everything.
Yep.
The trying to find a date. The trying to balance homework, study, extracurricular activities, plus just being a superhero.
Yeah, that too.
Kind of thing.
That little old chestnut.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that really works as just a straight comedy kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, they even reference Ferris Bueller's Day Off in the movie. Like, he has the running sequence from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and then you see that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off in the movie, and then he swings past and says, "Great movie!" I'm like, yeah, it's pretty on the nose. Like, we get what you're referencing, but yeah, no, absolutely. I think that inspiration in there is, like, paramount, and, like, as I said, like, works quite well as a specific version of a Spider-Man film in this regard. So
yes.
I've just, some of the lines, like Flash yelling down the monument, "Are you really friends with Peter Parker?" The version of Flash in this is good, and that he's been updated as well to, like, a contemporary bully, and that he's just kind of a rich asshole. I really like the actor as well, whose name is currently escaping me, but he's been in a bunch of stuff. And he's genuinely, like, he has a really great dynamic, not only with Peter, but also just with the rest of the cast and all that. All of the young people are cast in this movie so incredibly well. I think,
absolutely. So. Tony Revolori.
That's the one. Yep.
Is Flash. He's great. Jacob Batalon, I think it is. Who plays Ned.
I thought it was Battalion, but I could be wrong.
Battalion?
Yep.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. Yeah, but he does well. Zendaya.
Yep.
We've sung her praises in a previous episode.
Oh, yeah. Did we? I remember we
Greatest
talked
Showman.
about her. Yeah, I remember we talked about her, but yeah, she's really good in this as well. Like,
yes.
Especially that whole, like, I love the fact of the idea of the MG, well, then they reveal at the end that she's MJ, the idea of, like, an edgy social justice MJ that doesn't want to go up because it was made by slaves. I'm like, yes, 100%. Favorite person.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
I like drawing people in crisis. It's you.
Yeah. It's great. The teacher as well, like that Martin Starr, I think it is, who actually was in an MCU movie originally. He was in one scene in The Incredible Hulk. As just a guy in a library, and reportedly it's the same character in proper MCU canon, which I think is quite cool. But he's really funny too. Like, even after the monument scene when he's like, "I couldn't bear losing a student during a school trip."
Yeah,
not again.
Yes, no, I've seen him in a few things. He is pretty good.
Yep.
But yeah, actually, just the cameos as well are so good. From Donald Glover,
Yeah.
who has had a very rich history with the Spider-Man fandom.
Absolutely. And like very specifically sets up Miles Morales in this movie too, which is exciting,
Yes.
though I don't know if we'll get that paid off, but almost certainly one day, I feel. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of Miles Morales, this film very much takes a lot from Miles Morales' story as well as Peter Parker's.
Yeah.
And sort of kind of merges them into the two.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've talked about in a lot of the previous films that they always drew from the Ultimate Comics because that was the most recent modern reimagining of a Spider-Man origin story. But when this film came out, like, Miles Morales had been another kind of modern reimagining of a Spider-Man origin story, even if it's not Peter Parker. So, yeah, it draws a lot from that.
And, like, the character of Ned is essentially a new character for this movie, but is heavily based on one of the characters in Miles Morales' solo series, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so Ned is, technically speaking, a combination of two characters, but is really just one character who has had his name changed to another character. Ned Leeds, in the comics, was typically being portrayed as a reporter for the Daily Bugle, basically. There has been obviously a different number of iterations in Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane, which is a kind of a comic which Mary Jane was the main character in, which John Watts actually cited as an influence for this film. Ned briefly is briefly Betty Brant's girlfriend, boyfriend, which is actually something that happens in Far From Home as well.
Yep.
But outside of that, outside of the name, this almost has nothing to do with Ned Leeds from the comics. There has been one version of Ned Leeds who was depicted as Korean American. In Spectacular Spider-Man, his ethnicity was changed, so it's kind of similar to that. But in this, he is basically Genki Lee, who is a friend of Miles Morales in the comics, who is one of the first people who finds out about Miles' secret identity, and basically acts as Miles' guy in the chair, kind of, I want to say the Harry Osborn role, but not as tragic. They don't really have a falling out because they're actually a good, healthy friendship. Imagine that in a superhero story. And he looks exactly the same. He has a lot of the same mannerisms, similar ethnicity, so on and so forth. It to the point where Brian Michael Bendis even referenced Genki being renamed Ned Leeds in a comic when Genki used the fake name Ned, and someone commented saying that he didn't look like a Ned. Which felt like a bit of a slight insult, I think, but a funny way of going about it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, in reality, he's basically Genki
Yeah.
Lee, in everything but name. I find it a little bit weird drawing from a character that I would prefer to be more affiliated with Miles Morales. I think a lot of people kind of complain that there's just not a ton to distinguish between Miles and Peter's story, which I disagree with at the very least. I think there's a lot of thematic differences, which we'll get into in another episode, I'm sure. But one of the things around that is he has such a different supporting cast, and so kind of adapting one of those characters from the supporting cast to Peter feels a little bit weird to me. But their dynamic in this movie is so good, and I think one of the best things about it that I really can't be too mad, honestly. So
yeah, I think the optimum would have been to be more of a more original character. I think, but with that same sort of style, and just make it suited more to Peter Parker, I guess.
Yeah, redo Harry Osborn. Reinterpret Harry Osborn in an interesting way and turn him into this buddy cop dynamic. I think totally a way you could go about that.
And then you get the perfect twist of this Harry never becoming a goblin.
Well, that's the other thing. In the original comics, Ned Leeds does become the Hobgoblin for a little bit. Though it's a little bit complicated. I think he's brainwashed at some point, he's doing it against his will, or he was framed or something like that. But anyway.
So you mean standard comic fare?
Yeah, pretty much. So, yeah.
Okay.
Especially in Spider-Man's continuity, everyone and their mum becomes a goblin at some point, so just kind of the way it goes. But yeah.
It's tradition.
Yeah, totally. So, look, I don't see that happening anytime in the films at the very least. Though, granted, I would love if he adopted some sort of superhero persona, because I think the actor is great. I think that the dynamic he has with Tom Holland is fantastic as well. Just really kind of really nice, I think, and really funny.
Kind of, yes.
I'm looking at. Boy. still, this movie sometimes, like, I've seen it like 4 or 5 times and rewatching it again for this, like, I'm still just cracking up on a lot of that stuff. It's so good. Like, the script is, like, real crisp sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, the one thing that I want to see, it's probably never going to happen, but I want to see Ned and Shuri in a scene together.
Yeah, actually, I could see that. Just throwing memes
I
at
wanna
each
see
other,
the-
basically.
Yeah, the techie meme heads.
Yeah, pretty much. Guy in the chair. What are those?
And then they can finally reference, it's Wednesday, my dudes.
He even has the hat at some point as well. Yeah, it gives me confidence. Yeah, you're really rocking that hat. Yeah, no, of course. No, he's good. He's good. I really like it. Yep. Especially like the trio that they kind of become in Far From Home as well with Zendaya, I think is real great.
Yes.
Yeah. Regarding that, like a lot of the other characters, like Ned Leeds is probably the one that is least similar to their comic book counterpart. Like Liz Allen was a brief love interest in a lot of Spider-Man stories as well. Betty Brant is in this as a student. In the original films and in the comics, she's actually also a reporter or a receptionist, I think, at the Daily Bugle.
Yeah.
She was played by Elizabeth Banks. Yes, in the original film. So that's right.
As J. Jonah Jameson's assistant, I think it was.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Don't forget to take your medication. Use plenty of water. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and same with like a lot of the supporting characters as well. Obviously, this is a much younger version of Aunt May as well, which like kind of makes sense, I guess, for like aging down Peter too. I really like Marissa Tomei. She's not really given anything to do in this movie, which I think is a shame.
No.
Like, she never gets the proper Aunt May speech that she always did in the previous films, which, once again, I kind of missed, but once again, I feel they just didn't want to, like, redo that ground, basically. So.
And in hindsight, she does get a bit more of a prominent role in the next Spider-Man movie. Not as, well, not prominent,
She's
but...
in, like, 2 scenes at the beginning, and then that's it.
And some scenes at the end.
Yeah, sure.
But, like, as in, like, prominent as in they feel more Aunt May-esque.
Sure. Yeah. There is a deleted scene in Far From Home. We should save this for the Far From Home episode, but quickly. There is a deleted scene with her with a paintball gun, using it to test Spider-Man's spider sense while he's blindfolded, which I think is really fun, but it didn't make it into the final film, so... But yeah. But it kind of talks back to the fact that, like, I think this is a fun version of Spider-Man, but because it misses so many of those key details, specifically regarding Aunt May, but also a lot of other stuff, is that it's not like...
Yeah.
I don't want to say definitive version of a character, because I don't think any of that kind of... that dichotomy is, like, kind of a little bit tricky, but I don't know. There were elements of Spider-Man, at the very least, that I felt like were missing, even if I still really enjoyed the movie, and I think Aunt May's prominence was kind of one of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And also... the fact that the line, with great power comes great responsibility. If you want to hear that, you have to see it said by Peter Parker in the blooper reel on the Blu-ray DVD.
Yeah, which is a bit of a...
It's the only place you find it.
Yeah, bit of a difference compared to the previous one.
Yes.
So, yeah, though granted, like, he doesn't say... Uncle Ben in Amazing Spider-Man doesn't say with great power comes great responsibility. He says, like, something around it, so he doesn't specifically say the same... It's like... You know, with great power and something, and then great responsibility, like it's hamstrung. But anyway.
Look, close enough.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, this movie avoids a lot of the pitfalls of Amazing Spider-Man, so we can commend it for that.
Yes.
Good job. You're a better movie. Just going through some of, if there's any other references worth talking about. As I kind of mentioned, like, Vulture is almost entirely original in this as well. I think it's very funny that Michael Keaton is playing another, like, kind of intimidating winged creature after playing Batman in Batman 1989. So,
and Birdman.
And Birdman as well. I was about to say, like, it is incredibly weird and almost hypocritical to go from Birdman to playing the villain in a superhero movie, especially since, like, Birdman is kind of considered an indictment of superhero films in some ways. The director even referred to superhero movies as, like, cultural genocide, which I think is problematic on several levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to mention also just harsh as well. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I think, like, clearly he's here having a good old time, regardless of what he truly thinks about superhero movies or not. So, regarding... once again, talking about to some of the elements that are missed, this is apparently the only Spider-Man film in which he doesn't cry, and without a funeral scene as well. So, good job. Much more entertaining. He gets close when he's trapped under the rubble, which, once again, this is like the third Spider-Man movie that we've talked about that references If This Be My Destiny. But there's like the scene in Spider-Man 2, then I think there's a part in Amazing Spider-Man 2, or maybe 1, I don't remember exactly. And then they literally do the shot from it when he's lifting the rubble. Like, it's almost, this is the most comic accurate that sequence has been, so, yeah.
Even with the whole, like, half Spider-Man, half Parker face that they had reflected in the wall.
Yeah.
Which felt half of me was, yay, comics. I get that reference. The other half was, that seems on the nose.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't mind stuff being on the nose too much when it comes to comics. It depends on the way it's handled. Like, I think that moment is still quite good. Maybe because it's, like, one of the most, if not the most dramatic moment in the whole film. And, like, prior to that, like, I felt like, obviously he's trying to prove himself of anything and everything, but it doesn't have the same narrative weight in the way that it does for the previous films, but I kind of felt it for a brief moment there. Outside of, like, the hammy, if you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it kind of thing, which is kind of this movie's with great power comes great responsibility, so... Once again...
Which ironically came from the guy who gets his power from a suit.
Yeah, I was about to say. So, well, technically it's his brain. Tony Stark built this in the cave with a bunch of scraps, and that's what Iron Man 3 is about, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we know. But also, that's what he's known as.
He's Marvel's Batman.
Yes.
We get it.
Exactly. So, but anyway. Once again, maybe getting a super fancy suit from your billionaire buddy... and then beating up working class people who keep getting screwed over is like maybe not great. Anyway, no, I gotta stop harping on about that. Anyway, is there anything else you want to talk about regarding this film specifically? So I look much happier returning to these movies than I was returning to the Amazing Spider-Man films. So yippee-ki-yay! It's gonna go down quickly next episode, but until then.
I do, again, jumping quickly back to all the cameos in this movie. Again, I gotta show my love for Hannibal Burgess.
Wait, who?
As the coach.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Pretty sure this guy's a war criminal now, but I'm required to show these by the state. Yes. And even a cap in the video when he says, like, and your gym teacher, and the gestures to the wrong side. Once again, this movie's really funny. I love it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think in terms of building a world that is both perfect for comedy and just to show that, again, it's going to sound cliche, but New York is a character in of itself.
Ooh.
It did a really good job.
Yep.
Like,
or at least
again,
Queens in this regard. They don't really go to Manhattan in this at all.
No.
Yeah, there's no proper web swinging, which I missed too, so.
Although he does crash into a treehouse.
This is true.
Which does make up for a few things.
Sure.
But yeah, the scene that comes particularly to mind is, we've mentioned it in a previous episode, but hey, you're that Spider-Man guy. Do a flip.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Spider-Man, do a flip. Yeah! Yeah, that was fun. And when he, like, saves the bike and, like, a lady gave me a churro. Stuff like that. It really puts the neighborhood part of Friendly Neighborhood, which I think is an element that Spider-Man 2 captured as well, but you feel it in this movie too, which is nice. So, outside of all the property damage he also causes. Yeah.
And webbing a guy who's trying to get into his own car.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. You're a criminal. You deserve that. I'm like, once again, the white boy with a billionaire friend maybe shouldn't be saying that, but anyway.
I got ice cream in this.
Yeah, maybe stop vilifying disenfranchised. Hey, I gotta stop. Yeah, Donald Glover is great though. And he's not, and he's playing. Oh, we should preface as well. He's playing the Prowler, who is like my Miles Morales' uncle, who people also know from Into the Spider-Verse as well. Big part of that character. And then at one point he mentions, "I have a nephew in this neighborhood. That's why I don't really want the guns around." So yeah, good stuff. Looking forward to hopefully that paying off at some point in the future, which I assume it will.
Hope so too. Marvel Phase 4, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually we get Miles Morales.
Yeah. The TV series, because, man, these TV series are doing well.
Yeah, the Disney Plus shows. Yeah, it's true.
And someone like Miles needs that, I think. Needs the long-form story.
Maybe. I feel like the fact that it's still very much a Sony character puts that in really tricky water. And the fact that it's on an original, like, Disney Plus streaming as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's no box office receipts or anything for Sony to claim, but, yeah. Hard to say. I'm a little bit concerned about where the deal is going forward. But the alternative is Disney buying Sony, and I don't want Disney to buy anything else because it's already too big. So, what are you going to do? All right, anyway, shall we move into Do It Differently then?
Yes.
Jingle,
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Jingle. All right, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, again, this is going to be a bit more of nitpicky. I'm not going to do a full... I did that last episode, so I won't go the full dissection now. But a few of the key things that probably should change to improve it. It needs, I think, a tighter trim. Because there's not a lot of... It's not like there are straight scenes that I want taken out. But it does feel a little long at times. Some scenes just seem to drag on. And I think they could just some slight trimming in some of the cases.
Oh, okay.
Like, possibly the monument rescue at times. Just some little finite edits. And some of the others... weirdly, sorry, I just want to bring this up with that monument scene. I did like the fact that they looked like they were going to do the upside down Spider-Man kiss and then just drop Tom Holland on his head.
yeah, it's good stuff.
Felt much more to the character, and like, trust me, those kisses are just awkward as hell.
Yeah,
so
this is true. Yeah, speaking from personal experience, kissing people upside down, really unpleasant. Yeah.
I hate that I know that from personal experience. But yeah, so trim things up a little bit, maybe get a bit tighter of an edit, I think, because it just feels like, if it is going full comedy, keep up the pace. Like, sometimes it just lags in scenes where it shouldn't be lagging. If it's going to lag, it needs to lag in, like, the dramatic scenes. Like, I'm totally fine with cutting some of the stuff before the third act, and then, like, when they're in the concrete warehouse thing, and the vulture drops the roof on Peter's head, so we get that full scene. You can extend that bit out to make that more dramatic, but cut everything sort of before the quippy lines that, I'm just waiting for the thing to come in. Oh, look, it didn't touch me kind of thing. That probably could have edited a bit. Stuff like that is what I'm thinking. But yeah, aside from trimming, I think, it did a lot of good work overall, so there's not much. More of MJ, because she's just great as a character. And that's about it. Honestly, there isn't much I'd want to change in this. Just trim it up, get the pacing right, and if you really want to go for a bit more far out, really lean into the John Hughes of it all.
Yeah, fair enough.
Have the entire Spider-Man cast in detention for the entire film.
The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
No, have the Sinister Six meet via detention. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. No, cool. Fair enough. I've kind of struggled over a number of issues regarding how exactly I would do it differently, because part of me almost kind of wanted to, and I know this is going to sound weird for me at the very least, but like continuing like some threads of the Amazing Spider-Man series, but just integrating into the MCU in some ways, which I don't really know how I feel about. But like, my biggest problem with this movie is that it is missing so many of the cardinal elements of Spider-Man. I think tying him into Iron Man as well is like kind of, I could give or take. I would probably trim a lot of Iron Man out. Like, he could get the suit at the very least, but I would much prefer that it foregrounded Peter's like own kind of technological innovations, as opposed to just using everything that Tony Stark gives him, which I think kind of lessens his intelligence in some ways. Even if I think the suit is cool, like every gadget he has in the movie, he has used at one point or another in the comics. But I would just prefer it kind of came from his own ingenuity as well. So I potentially would have preferred there being a little bit more of a dramatic slant. Actually, maybe reference Uncle Ben at some point would be nice, and have it more about kind of the tribulations of managing. I would love a dichotomy between this billionaire showing up out of nowhere and taking you to Germany, and this like wild roundabout trip around the world, and then coming back and Aunt May struggling to pay the bills, and you're worried about not being able to afford school tuition and stuff like that. Like, I think kind of reintroducing bits and pieces of those aspects I think would have been great. Obviously, they would change the tone of the film in some ways. But I think there would be a way to balance that one way or another. The other major thing that I would change too is that the third act I would completely redo, in that I don't want it taking place on a plane at night that's flashing in the sky, which just hurts my eyes every time I look at it. And just have the plane crash almost immediately where it does, which conveniently is next to a fairground, which is like the perfect location for Spider-Man to fight a supervillain on. It happens all the times in the comics, it happens all the times in the animation shows and everything, and I remember watching the film the first time, I'm like, oh, they're gonna do the thing, they're gonna fight in the Ferris wheel and stuff like that, and it just didn't happen. And so if you crash the plane almost immediately, and then Vulture's trying to get away with gear, and then Spider-Man's trying to stop them as they're going through the showgrounds, I think would legitimately be a much more entertaining and just really, really interesting and visually viewable third act. So, in making a number of those, not that change specifically, but in reintroducing some of the other more traditional Spider-Man elements, obviously does make it more similar to the earlier films. But I feel like you don't need to meditate on them in quite the same way. But I feel like you need to acknowledge them at the very least. Like the fact that Uncle Ben is almost barely even referenced just feels kind of off to me, I think. So reintroduce some of that while still trying to keep the tone generally quite light, less Iron Man, and completely do the third act, and I think this would be great. All that being said, I still think this is a really good, fun Spider-Man movie, but this is good, but it can be better.
Yeah, no, now that you mention it, I do think, yes, that third act needs to be a bit more Shazam-like.
Oh yeah, it happens at the end of Shazam as well, doesn't it? Oh, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, I mean, Shazam has its own forgettable elements, and the villains are just grey blobs that they punch a bit. So at least the Vulture's more visually interesting in that way. So,
in cutting Iron Man, you're not replacing him with any characters. It's all just
I thought about it. I don't mind the idea of introducing Spider-Man into the MCU by tying him into another character, but I feel like Civil War kind of does that already. Like Civil War kind of shoehorns. I would, if it was up to me, I would introduce Spider-Man into the MCU not through Civil War but through a completely different way. But if I'm going to take Civil War as unchangeable in this instance and just talk about changing this movie, that's kind of what I would do. I feel sure, Happy Hogan can show up a little bit, but I would prefer he more be on his own, I guess. It's more about you briefly get this glimpse into this international wealthy world traveling era of the Avengers, and then you immediately go back to street level, and he's dealing with everything kind of on his own, and it's less about proving himself to Tony Stark and more proving himself to himself, which is kind of what it feels more like a classic Spider-Man struggle, I think. So yeah, so no, I thought about it. I would love to see him banter with, I don't know, Bruce Banner or something like that, but I think on its own there's so much stuff going on in this movie as is, and you can tie it into the MCU in many other ways, with the Vulture obviously, and I think that still works great. So
look, as long as when we finally see him, we'll be able to see him in the Young Avengers interacting with Captain Marvel and Shuri and the new Hawkeye and
Miss Marvel, you mean? I assume.
Miss Marvel.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yep. And Speed.
Who knows? Captain Marvel could be around, but
and
Miss Marvel as well.
True. And Speed and Wiccan and Patriot and all of the others that they're slowly introducing now. So, Young Avengers is not that far off,
yes.
I think. So, cool. Oh, well, with that out of the way, do you want to move into random recommendations?
Yes.
Yes. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I'll go first. A little bit left field, but I've got to bring it up, and I'm probably bringing it up again for, I've probably talked about this in the past as well. I don't think I've done it for a random talk, though. I think I've just brought it up in other things you see, but my Cousin Vinnie.
Oh, yeah. I feel like we've talked about this before, but maybe off air, I think. I don't quite remember.
Maybe. I don't know. Who cares? If you've heard me talk about this before, feel free to just skip ahead to this time up showing up on your screen now.
Wait.
Ha! You can't. It's a podcast.
I was about to say, how the hell do I integrate that? Yeah.
No, but yes, a fantastic performance by Marissa Tomei, which is the link.
Yep.
And also some good performances by the Karate Kid himself, who Look, honestly, I would also kind of like to see as a Spider-Man, like a 90s Spider-Man.
Oh, he would have been perfect casting for like an 80s or 90s
Yeah.
Spider-Man for sure. Yep.
Yeah, but it is such a good courtroom drama comedy. So, like, if you like this, you probably would like something like this, because it's very much about wit and sort of the city folk not fitting in with everyone else, which you sort of get out of this, that fish out of water.
Yeah.
So, although it's not it's less superhero, more courtroom, it does have quite a nice thematic parallels. Oh no, it's Ralph Macchio. That's his name.
Ralph Macchio. Oh, he was what's his name? The other guy. Yep. The bad Karate Kid.
What?
No?
No, he's the good
Oh,
one.
okay. Sorry, I'm mixing it up.
In the original,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. No.
I haven't seen Cobra Kai. He might change.
Yeah, I have seen Cobra Kai, but I keep mixing them up. At least the actor's name. So.
Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yes. He would have been a good 90s Spider-Man.
He would have. Yeah. Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah. But no, yes, definitely go watch that if you're looking for something fun with Marissa Tomei in it.
Yeah, I've seen it as well. I think the movie's great. I definitely recommend it too. Apparently, it's like one of the most popular movies, like as legal dramas go, actually with lawyers. Like it's one of the most accurate out there, which I really think just adds to its charm, if anything, because it is really quite delightful. So, yeah, cool.
Yeah,
awesome.
And of course, it has Joe Pesci in it.
Yes, who is also great.
Yes,
in one of his usual comedic turns, which I think is excellent. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. No, good stuff.
So what have you got?
So I was just going to recommend, I don't have anything majorly. I've been kind of racking my brain for anything Spider-Man related, but I've kind of covered a lot of the ones that I already have to in previous episodes. So this episode, I'm just going to recommend a couple of books that I've been reading right now. I've been going through Stephen Fry's, I guess you can call them trilogy of books on Greek myth. So the first one is called Mythos, the second one Heroes, which are the two I've read so far, and then the third one I believe is called Troy, which I have not read yet, but I'm going to get around to at some point. And it's basically kind of a classical, but also like really accessible retelling of a lot of Greek myth, going from like the early days of the Titanomachy and so on and so forth through the Age of Heroes and so on. It's really, really well told. It's really kind of charming and like really engaging as well. And super accessible, which I think is quite good for anything Greek myth. In many ways, like ancient Greece mythology was the original like comic book universe of crossovers and characters and things like that.
Yes.
Like I was reading the story of Jason and the Argonauts the other day, and like he was referencing all of the other heroes that have appeared from other stories, like Orpheus and Heracles and so on and so forth, showing up. And I'm like, this is basically just a classical Avengers. Well, theoretically, it should be the other way around. The Avengers are like the modern day Argonauts, but I think I really enjoy a lot of these stories. Obviously, so much of contemporary society comes from ancient Greece. Like that lineage is like very clear and apparent, even in just a lot of the words we use these days. And I find the books really, really charming and really easy to read. So I would absolutely recommend them.
Nice. Cool. As a fan of Greek mythology, I'll definitely have to check them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not have them. I borrowed it from a mutual friend, but I assume that mutual friend could also borrow them to you, so...
Excellent.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in all your, I don't know, suits made by billionaire friends, I guess. Whatever else. We'll take anything. We'll take anything.
Tell us what you think, what porn Ned was watching in that library.
Yeah, exactly. What's he into? No, I don't like that. He's playing a 16-year-old. No, let's take that back. So next episode, we're going to be talking about the first of the actual official Spider-Man spin-offs, even though we've referenced many of them so far. Not that many have been made, but the first one that has been made is, of course...
Venom.
Or as how I like to say it, as Eminem likes to say it, Venom! Yeah. I've seen it before. I don't really want to watch it again, but stick around for that. I'm sure it'll be an interesting episode one way or another. So until next time, fare thee well.
So, you've come to the end of another episode of Medium Shift. And what have we learnt? Bye.